Hi, everyone. Welcome to season 15, episode 1 of the Social Change Career Podcast. Happy almost end of September and start of fall. Today, we're going to be talking with Kajsa Hendrickson, a brilliant innovation and sustainability expert and partnership architect for people and planet, which is one of the coolest titles I've ever heard of. So we'll get into that, about a practical guide to growing your career in sustainability. A couple of logistical things. If you have not joined a live stream of the podcast previously, we usually go about an hour. We really enjoy hearing from people who are watching on LinkedIn or YouTube. So feel free to put a comment, let us know where you're watching from, a bit about your work and your questions and comments, which we try to weave in throughout the episode. The audio episode of this will be live either this Friday or the following Friday. And it's one of, I think we're about 200 episodes in. So go to PCN Global Listen or any major podcasting platform, and you can search by subject area. But we feature innovators from, I think, 30 different countries, from foundation heads to impact investors to activists to tech for social impact. So it's really honest conversations about advancing careers of impact. And then 3 requests. So first, please follow Kajsa on LinkedIn. Please follow PCDN on LinkedIn. And if you like this podcast or any podcast, please take 30 seconds to rate it on Apple Podcast or on Spotify or wherever you listen, and share it, because that's the number one thing you can do for any podcaster. Subscribe and to rate it. So that's the quick overview. To introduce Kajsa's bio, she's a sustainability leader, facilitator, and bridge builder with a decade or more of experience across government, academia, and nonprofits in the private sector. She has a bachelor's degree in global politics from Washington State University and a master's degree in peace and justice from the Kroc School at the University of San Diego, which is where we met many years ago. She's a trained strengths facilitator and has worked with organizations including the Tennessee Valley Authority, which for people outside the US, Kajsa will explain what that means, Southern Company, and Schneider Electric. Her career has included designing international education programs in China, Thailand, Switzerland, and Rwanda, and advising Fortune 500 companies on sustainability and stakeholder engagement. She was also a Peace Corps volunteer. You have to remind me which country.
It was not a Peace Corps volunteer.
I thought you were. Sorry.
No. I wish I could claim something that incredibly cool, but I cannot.
Okay. Apologies. I had that in my mind. Yeah. Okay. And so, Kajsa, thank you for joining us from Utah. I'm based in Medellin, Colombia. And really, please check out the work of Kajsa. And just to start off with, I met you. You were working at the Kroc School, which is one of the first, not the only, but one of the early schools of peace and conflict studies in the US. And just a little bit of tidbit of information. It's a beautiful campus, on a nice little mountaintop. San Diego's beautiful. And the reason it's called the Kroc School, if you like McDonald's, which I'm personally not a huge fan, but the widow of Ray Kroc, the founder, Joan Kroc, left in her will money to the Salvation Army, to National Public Radio, and she loved peace. And so she left money to Notre Dame University in Indiana and set up an Institute of Peace and a School of Peace Studies at the University of San Diego. So it's just a beautiful place, and it's a great institution. But anyway, so that's where I met Kajsa, I don't know how many years ago, and she was working as really helping to build out career services for, when the school was still in early stages. But Kajsa, going back to, let's say, your teenage years, did you... the world has changed a lot, but did you envision yourself in any particular profession, or what drove you curiosity-wise? Were you an athlete, a painter? You wanted to be a doctor?
It's funny that you asked that question right off the bat, because I literally had this conversation with somebody yesterday where she had started in environmental work and really realized that she wanted to focus on the social aspect of the planet and people. And I had swapped. I had started out wanting nothing to do with the environment. I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I wanted to be a diplomat. And then from there, I really fell in love with conflict studies, which sounds like a kind of inappropriate thing to say that you fell in love with, but I became really fascinated with why we have conflicts the way that we do, how they grow, how they stop, what systemic scales look like when it comes to conflict. And so that's where in undergraduate, I fell in love with understanding conflict, understanding its global impacts. And then in graduate school, did the complete 180 to understanding how natural resources play a role in that, how environment plays a role in conflict and perpetuating conflict or stopping conflict. And that's ultimately where I was like, okay, sustainability as a way to preemptively avoid conflict is where I want to focus my career.
And can you talk a little bit more about that transition? And, first of all, like, how in the world did you even start thinking about conflict and peace dynamics? And, did you do a study abroad program, a service learning trip? You met people from, did you learn languages? So where did that interest come from?
So I grew up in northern Utah, and I grew up as a part of a minority religion here. And so I'd always been really fascinated by religion in general, and had seen some of the tensions and the cultural communication that goes into having dominant cultures with minority cultures. And so that sparked just kind of this really deep interest in people and their interactions. And then I had the opportunity to live abroad when I was 17. And I spent 7 months in Thailand, 6 months in Australia. And during that point in time in Thailand was when they had a coup. So the country was going through massive political upheavals. And I had the privilege of getting to travel up and down through the north and southern parts of the country, and particularly I got to learn more about colonialism, got to learn more about how Southeast Asia had been hacked up and handed off by colonial powers, and all of the implications that it was still having at that point in time. So one example of that was being in southern Thailand with an area of separatists that wanted to be part of Malaysia. And the area was bombed a day or two after we left the region by separatists. And they were getting violent crackdowns coming in from the Thai government. And I became incredibly fascinated by how that was playing out across Southeast Asia, what it meant for the stability of Southeast Asia, and what the US's role had been, and particularly visiting countries like Cambodia and Laos, that the US was front and center in causing conflict in those countries. So that was really where conflict and its role in society, its role in stability caught my attention. And from there, I had the opportunity to go back into Morocco and to Vietnam and to Laos a few more times over the next several years during college, and started to flesh out a bit more of why conflict was what it was, and wanting to really understand what drove it, what causes conflict in one area, what doesn't cause it in other areas, the role the US has played in this, the role that global hegemons play in that in general. And so that's what really led me into being like, okay, graduate school is where I want to go.
Mm-hmm. And for people, the average age of our listeners between, let's say, 25 to 40, but we have some younger people and some people in their 50s and 60s. And so for people, and you can talk about this both from your own experience, but also how in the world you wound up working at the Kroc Institute after studying there. But can you talk a little bit about, for people who are thinking about a graduate degree or any kind of degree, particularly not in your generation, but the one people of 20, 25, 26 to 30, what is your advice when thinking about whether to pursue advanced schooling? How do you pick a program or not? Like, look at the alternatives. Is it worth the cost? And just like, not specific. I mean, San Diego is great. There's lots of other good programs, but how to vet a program and decide, one, is it potentially worth the investment, and how to decide if it's a right fit for that person's career goals?
I have so much to say on this, Greg. So brace yourself. I'll start with first the context that before going into graduate school, I was living in Eastern Washington, and I got lucky enough to get a job working in study abroad. So sending American students abroad. And that fundamentally overlapped between career advisement, academic advisement, graduate school planning. And so I will, no matter where I am in my career, and it's why I love being a manager too, I love advising people and helping them think through these things, because I had really great mentors to help me. A lot of the advice I would give students in working with them was thinking of their international travel and experience in terms of how it would help them professionally, how it would help them for graduate school. And so my advice to anybody when it comes to graduate school is advice that I received, which is a few things. One, just like anything, you get out of it what you put in. So if you go to grad school out of an obligation or to just kind of fill the next step in life, you might not get that much out of it. I've seen people get degrees from fantastic programs who had very little achievement afterwards because they didn't care about their program. They didn't come in with a clear understanding of why they were there, what they wanted to achieve. And why you're there and what you want to achieve can change, but those fundamentally need to be really central before you decide going to graduate school. You're paying a lot of money, unless you're in Europe or another country that helps subsidize it, which phenomenal. We should be trying to help compensate for higher education. But I want to push back on the narrative that higher education is the end all be all versus practical applied skills. And so I always want students or anybody who's considering an advanced degree to think through, what do I want from this? Is this going to help me get to what I want to do with my career? Do I have to do this? And are there other pathways that would get me what I want that are better suited? Because so often we assume that the advanced degree is there. But in talking to professionals who were doing the things that I wanted to do, so before going to graduate school, I did a whole bunch of informational interviews and asked, okay, what if I want to be a diplomat, if I want to be advising on conflict preparations or post-conflict restoration, what are the skills that I need? And the feedback I got was, yes, you need an advanced degree, absolutely. You need language skills, absolutely. And was able to really go into graduate school saying, okay, I know what I want, I know what I want to come out with, and I know that this degree will get me closer. With that, I'll add, in choosing degrees, I had applied to I had 5 top graduate programs that I got into. One of them offered me an okay scholarship. One offered me a great scholarship, but it was in a horribly expensive city. It was in San Francisco, and that scholarship would have gone nowhere. The next one was a school that I desperately wanted to go to, the University of California, San Diego, but I got no financial scholarship from there, and I was an out-of-state student. And my last option, or well, it was still one of my absolute top schools, was the Kroc School, and I got the best combination of cost of living, accessible city, but also financial support, so that I was not going to go into unreasonable amounts of debt because I already had debt from my undergraduate program. And I got advice from a mentor who was like, again, it's what you do with the degree rather than the degree title, especially if you're not trying to get the fancy Harvard title, but if you're looking between state colleges, or even if you're looking between state colleges and private colleges, what you're going to do with it is going to matter more than the degree institution. It's the networks you build, it is the relationships you build. All of those are what are going to dictate how successful you are in your program. Part of that also is looking at who the alumni are. So I looked very carefully, and the University of San Diego alumni were doing exactly the kind of work that I wanted to be doing. And I reached out to them, got their feedback on the program. And so by the time I went into grad school, I felt really confident that what I was going to do was going to get me to the career I wanted. I was going to get the networks that I wanted from the degree program. I was going to have access to the kind of internships, opportunities that can set somebody's career up. And that I would also have the mentorship from faculty to help me get through that program and to help me leverage my career. And so my first jobs out of grad school were ones where faculty helped me either through networking or through advice or just through direct recommendations. All of those played a huge role. So I know that that's a long spiel, but my spiel on it is decide if you actually want it and if you actually need it. And particularly for people from underrepresented backgrounds or for women, we tend to assume that we have to have every single qualification in order to succeed. You don't.
Yes.
So really find out.
That's not a long spiel at all. And then a related question, particularly let's say from the career advisor or mentor perspective. So when people come to you today, and we'll talk about your current roles and the many things you've done since Kroc and undergrad, but if they come to you and say grad school or not, and sometimes it's both and, like, and obviously it depends if you want to go into sustainability, work for a startup, work in AI, diplomacy is destroyed in the US, at least for the next 5 or 10 years. But like, what are the things that you would say, whether someone picks grad school or not, like the things to consider as alternatives? Again, it's this is not, everyone in the end has to make their own decision. So please don't listen to this podcast and say, Kajsa or Craig said, do this. And then but what are the things that are worth considering?
Absolutely. Part of it is applied experience, because I'm seeing this more and more, and even in leadership roles that I've had in organizations, I've pushed to remove some of the education requirements for experience requirements. So, and particularly in peace building work, I got into graduate school with this wonderful set of accolades from professional or from an academic background, and I was sitting next to practicing peace builders from Rwanda, from Nicaragua, from Afghanistan, like from all over the world, who had an applied experience that they were already doing the work that I was trying to get the degree to go do. They were trying to get the degree to help them get to the next stage of the work. So for all of them, they said, like, do I have to get this degree? No, I can keep doing this work, but this degree helps me get professional experience. This helps me build my networks. So they saw it as an opportunity to build on things, but they also were already doing the work that they were doing. So part of it is the applied experience and finding opportunities, whether that's, and I hate saying volunteering because that is such a privileged thing to go do something for free, and you should be compensated for your time. I would like us as a world to get to a spot where everyone's time gets compensated and where volunteering is something you do for fun, but that you don't have to go volunteer for free in order to get professional opportunities. But volunteering being one potential opportunity, internships, which again can come down to a lot of privilege, but leveraging your networks, getting involved, reaching out to the networks like you have on PCDN. And you'd also be surprised at how many people on LinkedIn will respond to a random message, especially from an earlier career or someone who's shifting their career, just wanting to get an informational interview. And you can never be sure how many people are going to run with that or give you opportunities and doors. So I'd say networking to get into professional environments, to get into opportunities, and then doing some of that applied work. The other one is doing skill building courses where you don't necessarily have to go do an entire full degree program. But, and Craig will probably talk about this even more later, the skills that get me jobs, get my foot in the door on jobs, are not my sustainability skills or my chops on energy. They're my really tangible skills, that project management, people management, partnership relationship building. Those are the skills that we, especially in academia, tend to neglect and focus on building those academic credentials and that knowledge, but not actually focusing on those skills and abilities that are also going to make you equally competitive and able to complete work.
Okay. Thank you so much. And welcome Abdi Aziz from Kenya. We have people watching from around the world. And please keep letting us know where you're watching from, your questions, your comments, whether you're on LinkedIn or YouTube. And so can you talk just a little bit for people who don't, I mean, please follow Kajsa on LinkedIn, but a little bit about, so you did a lot of research, you picked a grad program, you wound up working at the Kroc Institute for, a while. And then like, how in the world did you decide to transition to something else? Because and eventually moved more towards sustainability and actually more domestic, but then more global. So just like a little bit like your career path and like how much was just serendipitous, like you were in the right place with the right people at the right time. And, did you apply? People invited you, you met a mentor. And like, how did you know when it was the right time to switch? We didn't switch out of impact, but you did switch sectors. So just any reflections on that?
I'll try to go with a bit of a linear answer, but I'll start with the first and most important thing. I have yet to meet anybody who has a cool career or a career that I respect that was like, at 18, they picked the direction, they went for that direction, and they got it. Everybody who has a career of impact usually has a meandering path towards getting there. So I'd say best laid plans, yes, but be prepared for adaptability, because if you're too closed off, then opportunities won't come to you. And you also have to pursue those opportunities. And I will say that's one thing I've learned across my career is, and again, I've been given this advice from mentors, is actively pursuing what I want. I had a bit of a passive mindset in my undergrad of like, opportunities will come to me, and had good grad school professors who were like, no, go get it. You have to go fight for it. You have to go push for it. So in terms of how I transitioned into where I was, so I graduated at the Kroc School in 2017 and was looking for jobs afterwards. And it was very particularly difficult. My partner was based in San Diego. There's not a lot of opportunity. And by that point in time, I had decided that, wow, this intersection of environmental conflict, how natural resource management ties into global stability, and again, sustainability as kind of a pre-path for preventing conflict, really was where I found my sweet spot. So after graduate school, there was nothing in San Diego that had any kind of focus like that. San Diego is a very small, relatively insular community. It's a great place to go to graduate school, tremendous networking opportunities, but someplace like LA has a lot more national and international connections that you can be part of when it comes to job opportunities. And so I took a little bit of a pause there and did some consulting work, thankfully, because I had career experience in advising. And that's how I ended up working for the University of San Diego. Was they said, hey, you've got this career advising experience, come do this with us. And I did that for a period of time until I got opportunities essentially to hit some target skills. So I wasn't looking at how do I get a job in sustainability. I went through and talked to mentors and found out, okay, what are the skills that you need in sustainability? So I saw that I needed to have project management skills. I needed to understand some of the broader context. So I knew very much the social and human context, but I didn't understand how energy tied into water scarcity, which tied into human conflict. And I also had brought skills like project management, which I will say to this day, 15 years later or so, 10 years later, my project management skills are probably the number one thing that gets my foot in the door, because so many people have, oh, good.
Interrupt for 1 second here. So,
Yes.
because I have a lot of people ask me, so what in the world does project management skills mean? And then how much is getting the experience? And then, this comes up a lot, particularly with the destruction of international development in the current U.S. political. I have a lot of mid-career professionals asking me, and I have some thoughts, should I get a project management professional certificate or something equivalent? So can you just operationalize what in the world project management means to people who probably sense it? And then any thoughts, like how much is just the doing and what is the metric that employers want to see? It's like, is it that you've managed $1 million budget, or you fundraised, or you've done from like inception to tracking to completion? And because how do if you're getting it just by doing it, where's that metric that can make you more hireable versus, so any thoughts on that?
I have several thoughts on this that might be a bit controversial. Some employers want that PMP, that project management certification. Some employers, particularly if you are a professional project manager where that is the sole part of your job, that is all you do. I do not have a PMP certification. And I did that very intentionally. I don't want to be a professional project manager, because a project manager does not, in that more traditional sense, is someone who can be put into any organization, any context, any time, be given an idea, an outcome, etc., and then know, okay, this is how I take that idea. This is how I put it into tasks. Here's how I put it into who owns what. Here's how I actually assign people work. Here's how I manage those timelines, those deadlines. And you can do that in any context. So that is part of the value of project management skills, is that they are the skills to be able to manage budgets, be able to manage people, be able to manage ambiguity and flexibility, because usually project managers I think of them as like an octopus, in all of those Disney kids movies, the octopus that's just got its arms in everything and is moving all of the pieces, that's a project manager. And so at the end of the day, the buck stops with those folks. And so if you want to just do project management, a PMP certification is great. What I have found in my career, especially in sustainability, is that a lot of the professionals I work with are engineers, are scientists, or are social scientists, or maybe activists, where their specialty is in just how water engineering works, or is in how to design a campaign for social impact. And what I have found in those ones is that having the skills of a project manager, but not necessarily that hard scale, I follow a very strict timeline and everything, and that's all I do. That's what I found is most useful. And that's what I've coming into a lot of organizations, especially NGOs. Operational structure is not necessarily an NGO's sweet spot. I've found that in just about every NGO that I've worked with, and bigger non-government organizations and governments tend to have very structured bureaucratic systems. Smaller non-government organizations, startups, those kinds of areas really don't have some of that operational support. So anybody who comes in and who can manage their own projects, help create structure for their teams, because a lot of times people get elevated to leadership positions without actually knowing how to manage people, how to get something done, or how to be anything other than what we call an individual contributor, which is most of us going through our entire careers are responsible for our own work. And then if you come into a leadership position, all of a sudden you're responsible for everybody else's. project managers are responsible for everybody else's the entire time. So I don't know how much that quite answered the question, Craig.
No, it's very good. And welcome Jeroen from Sweden. Again, feel free to share your questions. We have about 20 people watching. But just a follow-up question from your hiring or being hired. So whether someone has a PMP or the experience, like, is there any metric? Obviously, it depends if you're working for $1 billion company or foundation versus like, $50,000. But is there any kind of metric you think to show? I mean, obviously, if you're a grad student and you help get involved and run campus events and you're managing a $50,000 budget or 100,000, like that's sizable for that. But is there any kind of magic number you think or scale, like just like, or best tips how to get that experience and show it to employers?
The money thing, having a nice dollar amount always looks good, and having any dollar amount on your resume, having those numbers helps make your resume jump out. But even if it is smaller amounts, even if it's $20,000, even if it's 10,000, A, that's still something to put on your resume, and B, that is experience to still go for. And I encourage that even amongst my graduate cohort. I took over managing our graduate student association budget because I knew how to manage budgets. And I encouraged other folks in my cohort to at least, even if they hated money, even if they wanted nothing to do with numbers, to at least learn how to manage the budgets for anything that they were proposing. Because being able to at least say that you have been assigned an amount of money, you have executed for that amount of money, you've put it on an event, you've hired a speaker, anything, and you came in on budget. That's the key word, is being able to say, like, whatever the amount of money is, that you can do it in that amount of money. That shows that you can track the money, that you know how the money works. Because working in several nonprofits, I've worked with amazing teams that were incredible, but who were led by people who didn't know money and who would overspend or who would do some harm to the program's ability to get its work done by mismanaging finances, not from any malicious perspective, but just because if you don't know how to put together and handle funds and track that money and be able to report back and say, that to me matters more. And especially like when I'm hiring somebody, that's even more of what I look like at. Yes, the dollar amounts is nice, but I look more for how do you handle if you go over budget? Can you come under budget? How do you keep other people on budget? Especially for anyone who's worked with faculty, trying to convince them to spend money that you tell them that they can spend. It's not easy. All of that also shows soft power skills, because we tend to think of money as great, the bean counters, the very tactical things. And that's why it's a very tactical project management skill. But the human side of being able to communicate that to people, to being able to help others understand why the money matters, helping them see how it keeps their work going, is something that I take tremendous pride in as a project manager, where I'm like, my work is not separate from your work. If you can't meet these timelines, if you can't handle this money, it harms all of our work. So I need you to be on board with it. And so there's a lot of soft people skills and a lot of soft power skills that come with project management too, that I also very much have leveraged in job processes, and I look for in other project managers too.
Okay. Yeah, it's great points. And I refer to like the business of social change. It doesn't matter if you're in private sector, philanthropy, consulting, government. Understanding, yes, like if you're a brilliant trainer or educational designer or graphic designer, those are all important. But understanding like the business, because it is a business, and like who funds it, how to administer it, how to report it, how to track it. I mean, some of it's obscene and ridiculous, but like understanding that as part of the process. So questions come in, but I want to ask one more question of you, and then we'll keep going. So I kind of interrupted a little bit when you started talking about project management skills. Apologies for that, but it's such a critical. But can you share a little bit more? So you transitioned out of the Kroc Institute and basically working in career support and career development, and you worked at a leadership center. I forgot the name, but like, how did you? Then you went to like domestic solar, and just like a little bit of a summary. It's almost like highlights of like the path you went on. And then like, any kind of reflections, not critiquing the sector, but like the pros and cons, because you worked in multi-stakeholder sustainability policy. So just like a little bit of the highlights and reflections, like for people who might want to work, the wonders and the challenges of those different approaches.
Perfect. I'll go through how I got to where I was first, and then use that to kind of do some of that reflection and answering. As I've mentioned briefly, that San Diego didn't have a lot of opportunities. So what I focused on when I was in San Diego was, okay, there's not jobs doing sustainability the way that I want to, or I don't have the skills that people are looking for in specifically sustainability. So I looked at, okay, what are the skills I can get? What are the skills I can leverage? And what are the skills that are ultimately going to get me either closer to the title that I want? So I looked at people who were working in sustainability and saw sustainability project managers, sustainability directors, and looked at some of the skills that they were working. So I used my project management skills and my stakeholder engagement skills to leverage getting a higher title. So I was very strategic in picking roles that helped fill my skill sets. So the job I took right after the Crockett School helped me work with multinational corporations. That I will always say, for better or for worse, being able to say that you know how to work with businesses is great. And I'd seen that a lot with sustainability, that so much sustainability work is not just government, is not just NGOs. It is the intersection of business, NGOs, government. And so I chose my next position very intentionally because it would give me business experience and it would get me a higher title that I wanted. From there, I was able to say, and that's where I was able to say some of the numbers that I got. So in that work, even though it was not focused on sustainability, I was managing about $2.5 million in projects over the course of a year. So, and it was with companies like Honda and Nike. So I was able to say I knew a little bit about business, especially coming from the social impact space. As you said, Craig, it's all business. Everything is, there's a money side, there's it's the unfortunate reality of the system that we're in, that is the structure that everything, whether you are in government, nonprofit, or the private sector, has very similar capitalist functions. And so being able to say that I understood, and it was a complete learning process, understanding how businesses work, understanding quarters and financial timelines and what motivates them. And that helped me get my next position, which was a project manager finally in sustainability and in energy with the Center for Sustainable Energy, which was just where I wanted to be. And I got to work on the largest solar incentive program in the world at the time. It was $1 billion program that really changed my entire life. They brought me on because of my project management skills, but because I also had interest in energy, interest in sustainability. And so I, again, leveraged those project management skills to get into the Center for Sustainable Energy as a project manager. But I was part of a 4-organization administering team. I oversaw our marketing, education, and outreach team. Not at all where I thought I was going to be, not what I thought I was going to do. But I had those social skills, I had those people skills, so they gave me that portion of the team. And from that point in time, everything just made sense because the Center for Sustainable Energy was where I got introduced to energy justice and environmental justice, which is probably one of the biggest cores to what I work on and what I care about. I joined the program because I was like, great, energy, sustainability, this gets me where I want. And during the program, I got introduced to energy equity and energy justice, and the whole concept of the program that was designed to engage stakeholders, create feedback loops between the poorest Californians and this program that was supposed to help them get solar. And it was a beautiful process of getting to see how policy was designed, where policy failed, how you would work with the community to hear where policy was failing, and then go back to the state to redesign the policy. And so I started to see this whole world outside of just quote unquote sustainability, and see that sustainability really was this relationship between policymakers, between the developers and the companies, and the regulation that helps ensure that they are doing the right thing. Because even solar companies are, their incentive is still to make money. Yes, they might be trying to do it through more clean energy. But at the end of the day, solar companies aren't like, I'm here to save the world. I'm here to make money. So we got to see the regulations that it took to keep solar companies really trying to meet the impact needs of the program.
Can you talk a little bit about, so what is that? I mean, obviously environmental justice and energy equity, it's true for all sectors, whether it's education equity, tech equity, AI equity, but like, what does that mean in practice? And like something you might feel comfortable sharing, so like, I mean, a lot of ideas are beautiful on paper, or if people are sitting, even if you bring together lots of stakeholders, like, so let's not make solar just, available to commercial industry or office buildings or rich people. or like so what is it
Yep.
like, what was the idea, and then how does that get operationalized, and the challenges that occur, and to make it equitable and inclusive, like an example, or like the
Yep.
framework or the lens that means.
I am happy to dive into that. And so tell me if I go too long on this, because this is, I get this kind of blew my mind. So the program had been designed by a state legislator from an environmental justice community in California. And in this, when we're talking environmental justice, we are talking about communities that are lower income, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and that by California standards had higher exposure to pollution levels, to poor air quality, to industrial processes. So, and for the solar industry, for those who aren't familiar with it, the solar industry was largely created to go onto homes, single family homes, which in California was largely white upper class families who could afford to put solar on their houses. So that means, and those people were also getting a financial benefit from solar. So solar, when you installed solar, you got a credit back on your account. So that means the poorest Californians were still largely living off of dirty energy. They were bearing the health effects of dirty energy, couldn't afford solar, and solar had never been designed to go onto, there hadn't been a program really looking at how do you get solar then onto low income communities where everybody doesn't have a single family home. And so the program was a pioneer in saying, okay, we take these multi-family apartment complexes, install solar on them, and create jobs for the people in the buildings. So we set regulations for all of the solar contractors that they had to have a certain number of trainees, they had to pay them a certain wage, to ensure that people from the community could actually get a job in solar. They could go through free training programs. They could learn how to get into this really high demand industry, even if they were a low income person from Visalia, Central California. So that is part of the operationalizing justice and energy justice and energy equity, particularly someplace like California, where roughly a third of people's income goes towards their energy bills, and it can be higher and lower depending on the area, but California has some of the most expensive rates in the country. So the goal of the program was creating jobs for people who, in a high demand, high paying industry, unlike coal or oil and gas extraction, which sometimes was, sometimes wasn't. So creating those jobs, creating access, creating knowledge bases and information, while also creating economic opportunity and lowering bills. So it was addressing energy justice by helping people lower their bills by installing the solar program. The program was paid for by California's greenhouse gas offsets, which those of you from some countries that actually have full greenhouse gas cap and trade programs. So this program was also being paid for by polluters. It was not being paid for by ratepayers or by taxpayers. All of that was very intentionally built to make sure, because you can say like, great, let's get solar onto poorhouses. Perfect. You could do that really wrong. And this program did so much work with communities and compensated communities to give them feedback on if they were actually doing it right or not. So all of those are justice practices that were being applied to the program in very tangible ways.
Amazing. So more questions are starting to come in. So if you can just, before we start getting audience questions, can you just share a little bit more? So you went and worked on this project, and just kind of the highlights and reflections. What happened after? Like, why did you choose to move out to something different? And then,
I'll get into some of what you'd asked before about some of the pros and cons and reflections. So I was in that program for 2 years during the pandemic, a formative part of my career. And I really fell in love with energy justice, energy equity as a way to avoid conflict, a way to elevate and grow people's lives and livelihoods. And so there was not a ton of growth opportunities at that point, and I had kind of capped out where I wanted or what I wanted. And I also had at that point an opportunity to build their stakeholder engagement program from the ground up, which I will add as another star point to get into later. That stakeholder engagement is a huge skill up there with project management that I'm happy to talk about how and why that's a skill, how to frame it on your resume. how to talk about it, because that's something, again, a computer can't do that. Eventually, a computer can do project management. Like AI will eventually replace that skill set. Stakeholder engagement, it probably won't. From that opportunity and that experience, I really wanted to get into where do you go next? I was like, I'm focused just on California. How do I upscale this impact? And I'll say with the caveat of, I'm an extremely ambitious person. Sometimes ambition is stupid. So sometimes you do just have to tell your ambition to be like, I need you to go sit in a corner and chill, or like have a negotiation, because otherwise your ambition can lead you to making choices that you don't necessarily align with later. And so, but my ambition was really like, I want to work on this on a bigger scale. I want to work on it beyond California. And so I had an opportunity to join a boutique consulting group that advises multinational corporations, particularly we would call them the reputationally challenged corporations, on how to work with and engage communities that hate them, how to build relationships and get feedback from community groups that are opposed. And I'll be blunt, this was companies like ExxonMobil. This was, I'm trying to think of, this was the Tennessee Valley Authority. They don't count quite as reputationally challenged, but they are the largest public utility in the country. This was several other private utilities. This was Chemours. This was chemical companies, Dow. So this was working with a lot of really big name companies. And it was focused on, I chose it because of my own personal philosophy of, I wanted to be a whisper from within rather than a shout from without. I wanted to be...
Wait, I want to interrupt there. Is that an original quote, or is that from someone else? I like that.
That came from Amy Carpenter at the Kroc School.
Okay.
She was one of my mentors.
Okay.
And Amy had said to me,
whisper from within rather than a shout with, so that gets into like, whether it's better to work within the system, outside the system, on the policy level. But that's a great quote. Okay,
and it had come to her, I'd come to her one day being like, but I'm not an activist. And she was like, you don't have to be an activist. She was like, there's a role for activists. And there's a role for people who can influence internally to organizations. And particularly a lot of policy comes from that whisper from within. And so I chose that role so that I could do that shout or that whisper from within and work with some of these companies I was working with most of their sustainability teams on their sustainability initiatives, on their stakeholder engagement. So the whole company had got it's called Future 500, had gotten started because of multinational corporations screwing it up with their stakeholders and having stakeholders take over their investments or stakeholders launch lawsuits. And the point was, if you listen to your stakeholders sooner, you won't get as many lawsuits, you won't get as many issues. And so a lot of what we did in that role, which I loved, was being a conduit between NGOs, environmental justice groups, public offices, and then the corporations, trying to help them understand, how can you be doing better? What can you be doing better? And knowing that a lot of the people I was working with were the change agents within their organization, their company. And so they were trying to figure out how to get language and relationships so that they could shift the way their company worked, which is hard when you're in capitalism and the fundamental goal is still making money. And so a lot of what we did was also, how do you build that narrative of, if you work with your stakeholders, you will make more money. It'll go better. It'll go smoother. So, and again, that was focused largely on sustainability. So I got to, even from that role, broaden my understanding of energy. I had worked with utilities a little bit. I'd worked on solar, but I got to suddenly dive into carbon management, onto carbon capture, onto mineral extraction, onto biodiversity, and saw this just wonderful breadth of how many issues companies were trying to grapple with. And had opportunities to really try to build some good relationships between companies and help them look at what, since environmental justice was such an important part to me, that as they were building out their energy systems, how they were integrating energy justice and environmental justice into the work they were doing. So to kind of close out that gap, I'll say that I ended up then choosing an opportunity to work more on federal policy, because my degrees are more focused on policy. So I took an opportunity to work with a group called Carbon 180 out of DC on federal policy around carbon management, and especially how do you remove carbon from our air without doing the same harms that every other technology in the world has done. So that's kind of where I'm at that point. And then right now I'm actually doing explicitly, because of so much of the harm that's happened at the federal level, I'm focusing on doing consulting with solar companies on their stakeholder engagement, where I'm using my project management skills and my stakeholder engagement skills, because right now is a rough time. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. That what the changes that have happened at the federal level, I know more people than I would like to say who have lost their jobs, or solar companies that are shutting down entirely. So that was a lot.
Yeah. That was amazing. So I have lots more questions, but I want to bring in a few that have come in. This is from Jerome. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, from Sweden. He works voluntarily on the spare time in schools, educating children and youth about ocean works, global issues with pollution, and giving children and youth a hope for a better future
Yes.
via Our World 2050. And he's asking for any thoughts on finding funding to work full time in schools. So this could be specific
Ooh.
to Jerome or in general. And so one thing, I mean, I think there's two parts to the question. So one, if you're part of an NGO, any
Mm-hmm.
tips on fundraising, whether it's from foundations or corporates or multilaterals or governments? And the second, if you're an individual and you're trying to build a career in this around environmental education, any suggestions? I mean, not, obviously we don't know all of your situation, Jerome, but I think you're based in Sweden. But, one is like tips on the funding end if you're
Mm-hmm.
representing an organization, and two is tips on the individual career end.
Thank you for breaking that. And thank you, Jerome, for the question. And I'll break that up the way that you did, Craig, and say, first and foremost, up there with project management and stakeholder engagement, fundraising is the one thing that I wish I had built more skills in when I was younger. I don't know anybody in fundraising who has any threat to their job security, because that is a skill that is always wanted and always needed. So, whatever you are doing right now to fundraise to support this, put that on your resume, put it on your LinkedIn, shout it from the rooftops, because that is a really important skill. And so when it comes to that fundraising side, I'll be honest, right now it's really challenging. So what I've seen in the US is that everybody is scrambling for funding to the point of a few recommendations. One is seeing if there's anybody out there who's already doing the work that you're doing. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, so see if there's somebody out there who's doing it, who has similar skills, or who might be hiring, or who might be investing in the work that you're doing. And do check the big funders, including Bezos Earth Fund and Gates Foundation, but also check within your country. Check the cities and municipalities, check the federal initiatives. A lot of federal initiatives kind of go under the bus, or don't necessarily get as much attention. So there might be those kinds of funding opportunities as well. I'll say again, from the big investment standing right now, it's challenging. And Craig, I'm sure you can weigh on this even more, that donors are scared when there's economic uncertainties. Donors clamp up. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Craig, but
I'll just add three things. No, I think it's very helpful. First is sometimes there isn't the money. And so sometimes it might be get a good enough job and do the work on the side. And that's not the answer that a lot of people want to hear, but that could be the truth. Second is if you're doing really meaningful work, sometimes the money, I don't want to make sure it shows up easily, but sometimes corporates have actually approached me because of something. I don't want to say it's about me, the team, and they're they want to make. So part of it is making sure you're networking, not to get the money, but with people who are interesting. And if you have an organization I've been on boards too. So part of it is also thinking if you're representing a nonprofit, this is more than an individual, who's on your board. And a lot of times boards tend to represent the same people from the sector the organization's representing. And really good boards, and it's a lot of work to do this, will have people from the sector, but also people who are like-minded or open-minded from, I've been on boards with people, I won't go into details, but I'm here's my annual contribution, it's $200. I'll give time. And the other people on the board, here's my $80,000. But they'll bring people from the private sector, impact investing, even defense or science, who maybe don't seem like they would fit, but they're some of the best advocates. So obviously you have to think about ethics. So I think that's part of it. And then also, like Kajsa said, thinking I've gotten funding from, bilaterals, foundation. I mean, not me as part of teams for different things. So sometimes local government. So it's also making sure you map out Rotary. So it's map out the different groups, and there's also in-kind contributions. So sometimes it's not money, but someone might have an expertise and can donate their time. But it's hard.
And I'll say an example of that. So the community that I live in, we are trying to do a river restoration because we have a terribly trashed river that goes through. And so we're going to the local utilities. We're going to Facebook just built something here. Meta just or Amazon just built something here. So they're figuring out who to go to at those companies to be like, great, do some good and either give us some in-kind contributions. Can you donate? Can you donate time or expertise to your scientists, or can you donate funds? So all of those are really good recommendations, Craig.
So now there's a question from Chi, comes from YouTube. So Chi, feel free to add any more. How do you highlight your project management skills within your resume? So one specific to project management, but as someone who has helped hire, like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially now in the age of AI applications and AI slop and mass displacement from a lot of the impact sector, particularly in the U.S. but elsewhere. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of employers. I mean, I talk to employers a lot. So I just talked to someone. They only had 200 applications, but it was a very specific job. But a lot of times they're getting 1,000, 500, 3,000. So just like one is for project management, two, whether it's from your own experience or thinking about the AI age, like what what makes a difference that you are one of those people who's at least considered. And if
Oh,
it's not from yeah, go ahead.
no. Like I think this is the question du jour right now. So it's a really, really great question, G. And I have talked to recruiters about this. And this is somebody where I have 15 years of experience, and I'm still going to recruiters being like, how do I make myself stand out when I'm going up against PhDs and VPs? And so I'll share a few things that I've heard in general about handling AI, and I call it getting past the portal. Like, how do you even get yourself seen? Um, but then I'll go into explicitly on the project management after. But I'll start first with these three. One is, if you haven't done it already, I hate even having to use AI to do this, but actually having AI run a test on your resume and your cover letter versus the job description. And having AI write a cover letter for you is a terrible idea. Think of it like Wikipedia. You use AI to help get some basic things done, but don't expect it to think for you because it will do a terrible job and you will be much better. But it's called an ATS screen, where you write into an AI chat saying, run an ATS screen on my resume or my cover letter versus this job description. And it'll say you have weak spots because you don't have X, Y, and Z covered, or you don't explicitly say these words that an AI machine might be scanning for. And I have a friend from the Nature Conservancy who gave me the most explicit details several months ago on just how to get past the portal with the Nature Conservancy and just how to make sure that every single word you used highlighted something explicitly from their website or from their job description. Again, to an equity perspective, really unfair, but we are an employer's market, so that part aside. So do run those ATS screens. The second part is just making sure that everything does make sense. Make sure every I is dotted, every T is crossed. I hate to say it, but especially in a competitive market, I have seen job applications thrown out because they missed a period or because they misspelled something. And it sucks, but you do have to kind of go through that extra level of attention and focus. And then also getting an idea of what the company wants and is looking for, what the job is looking for, and not saying what your qualifications are explicitly to meet it, but how you can help them go further. Again, so easy to say, so hard to write in your resume and cover letter. And then explicitly when it comes to the project management skills, on the jobs, I do look at how they list project management. So some of them will say manage budget, execute projects, manage teams. And even if you've done it volunteering, so I worked with a student who, when we were going through her resume, I was asking her some questions because she had a weird gap. And she was like, well, I was an ED executive director for this volunteer group. And I was like, why isn't that on here? And she was like, because it was small, it was informal. And I was like, did you learn how to manage people? Oh, you learned how to get funds. I was like, the title of the position doesn't matter anywhere near as much as what you can say it did for you. So even in volunteer positions, and I interned with the State Department during graduate school, and I got that feedback from them that I was like, oh, I'm a graduate intern. How do I list this on my resume? And they were like, you were the site officer while you were here. Put site officer. And they were like, but say the things you did. They were like, you ran a team, you managed an entire event, you did these things, because that matters more than the fact that I was an intern. And then also having them as references to go in and back that up. So for your project management, I would say if you've managed a budget, be sure that it's on there. If you, even if it's if it's $1,000 budget, you don't have to put the number in there explicitly. Do you know how to keep tabs on if that money went where it's supposed to go or not? So managing a budget, if it is that you have gotten people to get work done when you weren't their boss. So then there's all kinds of diplomatic ways you can say that. You can say align team members to meet specific goals, or non-reporting team members to meet specific goals. So being able to say that you can use those soft power skills to get other people to get jobs done, because so often in work you will be trying to get other people to get work done and you have no authority over them. So the other one is referencing, if you, that's where being able to tie into accomplishments. So yes, I have, even if it was in grad school, like led a 70-person event for X graduate program that led to 70 more people signing up to join the program, or that led to career opportunities for some of the other students, or that led to you getting a job. So show those outcomes, but then whatever way that you are doing it. And a way that I work around this is that I don't list my paid work experience versus my volunteered work experience. And I have advocated for this in organizations I've worked for, that and ones that are focused on justice and equity will also remove those requirements, because so often, because of how our organizations work, because of how capitalism works, we might be doing the most impactful work in our volunteer work. You might be just getting paid to be a cashier, but you also might be doing really cool initiatives with that, or you might be doing volunteer work. So I just say experience on my resume, and have on there if there's something big in particular. So like being a graduate intern, I list that under my work experience. I wasn't paid for it, but I got to do incredible things with it.
Awesome tips. Yeah. And I think part of it is the way I like to describe it, like showing why you are the right person for this role in this sector at this organization without being egotistical. Like show, don't describe. And like, and it's like, if you, and this is a billion years ago, but I had a friend, this is when U.S. federal government was a little bit saner. So I've consulted for U.S. federal government, but I had a fellowship. I was supposed to work for the government. I won't go into all details. And then a friend of mine, like I applied for a few jobs. I got interviews, or like actually I didn't get many interviews. And a friend of mine was in government. He always tried to get me to apply. I don't like wearing suits, so I didn't. But eventually he said, "Hey, dummy, like you got to use the keywords. Like basically look through, they used to call them, they're changing it now, but knowledge, skills, and abilities." And then I started getting interviews. I still wound up not going to government full time, but it's like, you've got to understand, like you have to match your skills and language to the employer's needs. And if they have to decipher it, even if you have a recommendation, they generally are not going to look at it. So a couple more questions, and feel free others to bring them in. So one is, and I'll say one thing I disagree with you on. So that if you just use AI to do without customizing it, the cover letters will be crap. But if you do customize and train the AI, and you can do this in Claude and Perplexity and ChatGPT, it takes training. You have to understand how to do it. And then if the employer doesn't explicitly state, it's funny because some employers, even like Anthropic, which is one of Claude, they'll be like, please don't use AI in your applications, an AI company. But most employers, like some have guidelines, some don't. But if you human train it to understand the code, understand your framing, and then train it, and then like it can save you 90% of the time as long as you still humanize it. And you have to think about the ethics of this, but I'm just saying, like, if you just put into ChatGPT without customized training, then you're going to see these words like treasure chest, or just like you can tell in a minute the structure. But if you humanize it, or the other way is like you human write it, and just say, there's a tool I love called LexPage, which I think is the best. There's also Grammarly, but like a lot of times I'll human write something, but then I'll go through LexPage because it's like improving the writing. So you can go through and say like, oh, you should change this word. Yeah. So I like that. Obviously you have to adjust to the employer. So one question, since we started talking about AI, and before we started, going live today, we were talking about how AI is affecting one is like the insanity in US government, like the idea, Trump said last week at the UN, climate change is the biggest hoax imposed on humanity ever. I mean, we're not going to get into politics, but it's ridiculous, it's stupid, and it's harmful. But anyway, but how is AI changing the sustainability sector, or how do you think it will change?
Ooh, ooh. Love this. I'll start with because the focus of this is getting into sustainability. So I'll put out a positive and a negative here for what this means for the sustainability industry as a whole. One portion is that a lot of sustainability for the last several years has been on reporting and data collection, which is exhausting work. AI can take some of that off, but it is going to cut down a lot of jobs that exist in sustainability right now, or it's going to substantially decrease them, particularly because US companies are already rolling back a lot of their climate commitments given this policy environment. However, those of you in other countries know that your countries probably are not rolling back, and that multinational companies who work in places that have higher standards are still adhering to those standards. So it doesn't mean that sustainability is going away or is changing. It does mean that how it's addressed in the US is going to look a little bit differently, and that some of, again, those early career positions or those kind of monotonous tasks are going to be done by AI, which is a threat to early career positions. And I have a friend who specializes in this at Deloitte. She specializes in the future of work. And what AI is going to mean for it. And she said, like, it's wiping out those early levels of professional positions, and that's a huge risk. In terms of sustainable working, it's a huge risk because that cuts out people making a pipeline of professionals that are ultimately going to take higher level roles. But the pro to that is that also means that a lot of the, again, really monotonous work that sustainability has relied on is moving to the side, so people can focus much more fully on the ground metrics, reporting, actually doing projects that have impact. And I think it can be used to leverage companies saying, great, we have tools now that can do so much more and can make us so much more efficient. So we need to be putting our resources into more tangible, sustainable efforts. And that professionals who can say and bring really tangible skills on what sustainability looks like, what it looks like in practice, have a viable argument to make with companies that this is good for your business, it's good for your bottom line, and AI is going to save you a ton of time. So great, put that saved time towards better, higher outcomes in your sustainability work. I lost track of what the second question was.
I'm just trying. So yeah, how it's going to disrupt sustainability, both jobs and the sector.
So what it's going to mean for the sector is going to be particularly interesting. And my husband works in agricultural tech, so we get into this debate regularly. In some instances, it's going to be a positive disruptor for sustainability because we can get information more easily. There's a lot of, for anyone who's followed the Securities and Exchange Commission's requirements for companies in terms of reporting and being able to claim that they are sustainable. A lot of that has been buried in very deep data and analytics that gets lost in these 100-page reports and is reliant on some very faulty supply chain tracking and things. AI can help streamline and also push transparency in sustainability initiatives. And I'm sure most people have heard of Nestle claiming that their chocolate is child labor free, and voila, it's not. So AI can play a big role in transparency, but also in, again, enabling access for people in those countries to hold accountable or to have dispersed and distributed accountability mechanisms for companies. Just like social media has helped us hold companies accountable in some ways because we have more ability to post to a company and say, here's an example of you not adhering to the human rights standards that you're setting. The disruption to it is going to be, I think, more right now because of politics, because the U.S. government's impact across the world with its tariffs is just a risk to investment in sustainability and companies prioritizing it, particularly when you have the war in Ukraine that has skyrocketed natural gas prices, when you have the US's tariffs. All of that destabilizes the ability of the entire economic system. And so, unfortunately, in the hierarchy of needs, companies lower down sustainability. The pro is that I'll say, especially working with local states and governments and working with international governments, is that local states and municipalities, particularly in the US, are not backing down from their sustainability initiatives, even in deeply red states that have their state government is in opposition. I've worked with the city of Memphis, I've worked with the city of Nashville and Knoxville, and they are all pushing forward and holding the state and their utilities and the companies to higher standards. So there's so much work that can be done at the local level, the grassroots level, the regional level, and then internationally, that other countries can hold those standards up for companies that are working within them.
So a few more questions. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
And obviously, if people haven't read, like the environmental impact of AI is, I mean, one, it really connects to energy and climate and community justice, that the large data centers, which are being built all over the world. Although I used to live in Virginia. Virginia has one of the largest concentration of data centers in the world. Is the environmental impact of these data centers on water, energy, clean air is insane. And a lot of the climate goals that, let's say, big tech has been working towards or claiming to work towards are being disrupted. And so there's a lot of concerns. And then some people say, well, if you just compare that to the, let's say, cattle farming, it's not that big. It depends what you're comparing it to, but it's big. So a question here, and we've talked about this many times.
Yeah.
For people who want to work in sustainability, I mean, I do angel investing, and I'm good at, I teach on investing for impact at the university. And I've taught on this lots of times. And I like to think one of the biggest impacts an individual or a company or somebody can make is where, if you have any excess money, which obviously is not everybody has that, like where you choose to invest, buy, or park that money can often have a bigger impact than like anything else. And Project Drawdown is doing great work on this and others. And there was a report that came out about 2 years ago that just said the amount of money some of these, I mean, one is like economic equity, which is a whole nother area, but the amount of money some of these places have, I'm not even talking about like, the Elon Musk, but just Apple or Netflix or just sitting around, like where they choose to put that money, the both community environmental impact is insanely, like, whether it's sitting in a bank like Amalgamated Bank, which is a B Corp, like, there's banks around the world that are part of the global Alliance for Banking on Values. So like, is it sitting in a bank that's lending that to community or things that are, or to like, is it going to prisons? And anyway, so like, that's a huge thing. But one of the things is like, if you're working on sustainability, at least we're consuming 5 to 6 planets a year. And the way the world is going is like, is it even worth working on, both like intellectually, because so many, I think mom and pop shops or whatever you want to call it, can be very sustainable. But it seems like once companies get to a certain scale, they're not I mean, even if all the talk there are some companies like Fairphone in the Netherlands, but just thinking about sourcing of the minerals, like, like the materials that go into cell phones, you can take them apart, or like Tony's chocolate, but like most companies, no matter what the discourse are fundamentally, I mean, they're providing a service a lot of us use, but they're fundamentally destroying the planet. So like, is it even worth thinking about this? Because it's all just tinkering. And then how do you stay sane when, there's so many challenges? Like, both, is it like the intellectual question, like, is it even worth engaging with? And then for people choosing to work in sustainability, whatever aspect, how do you stay sane?
Okay, I'm going to try and keep my head straight on this, because you brought up so many incredible points that, as Craig said, we've talked about so many times. The first and foremost that I want to bring up on the cost of AI, if you think about every sci-fi movie you ever saw, none of them predicted that we would just deplete all of our resources so that we can have AI-generated cats eating a fake tomato. Like that's the risk to our planetary resources from the growth of AI is a genie we can put back in a bottle. And Common Good does a lot of advocacy on this. So I will just make that pitch to everybody that if you care about sustainability, if you believe in everything, this is one of the biggest challenges we will face in our generation, potentially as a species, is the amount of companies rolling back their commitments because of AI, the amount of resources. And I say this, so I live in Utah, which is a desert. For anyone who is not from the US, it is a desert. And they just announced the largest AI data center in the world is going to be built in the central part of our state, which has no water. None, no water, no nothing. And we're already having records of coming out of Texas and other places where data centers are being built of people having energy brownouts because the amount of energy that's going to the AI, of them having to cut back and curtail their water because of the amount of water that the data centers are using. So my plea to everyone is to track if that is coming into your communities and advocate hard. Speak to your legislators, your representatives, everyone. My community thankfully just rejected a data center here because this is something that we can push back on and say this is not serving humanity in the way that we want it to, or that we need regulations to put it in its place so that it serves certain things and does not deplete the resources that we are already facing such hardships around. So on the question of does it matter? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I am a climate optimist. We only have one planet. All of our projections are still, they are still based on models. We are grossly outpacing the models that we had initially projected over the last 40 years. And it can be really defeating some days to be like, what's the point of trying to do any of this when we have companies that are so vastly outweighing anything that we were doing? And I'll be honest, I worked in carbon management. I worked in carbon removal in my last job. And I very much struggled with putting money into technology that was trying to pull carbon out of the air that would never, ever compete with the amount that was being emitted just from the most basic things going on, let alone the fact that technologies that are trying to make the planet better can't compete with AI for the cost of energy. So it's very real. And I go through that every single day. I also then try to get as much time as I can in nature, reminding myself of what I'm fighting for, that all of those natural spaces are not gone. All of those animal species that I will never see are not gone. And every single bit that we do now has a chance of making sure that we still have those, but also that narrative, just kind of like we've probably all heard the narrative that like your own carbon footprint, which was a campaign by oil and gas companies to try and make us feel like we are the problem and we're not, it's companies that are the problem. In some ways that should be empowering, that yes, don't kill yourself over whether or not you have a plastic coffee cup, which I do and I hate and I feel bad about. Don't kill yourself over it, but hold others accountable. Try to spread the information as much as you can, because most people, if they hear doom and gloom, will shut down and they will try to do nothing else. So focus on hope where and how you can, focus on information where you can, but also focus on the emotional plea to people that this isn't bipartisan, this isn't focused on immigration, this isn't focused on economics, this is focused on this is an issue that every one of us has. And it really comes down to even more than that, a class issue, that our resources are being grossly misused and held in certain areas. There are more of us than those who have most of the resources. And every single person that you say, hey, like you talking to your legislator about this, or you coming to a protest, or you writing an op-ed about how important the natural resources that you have are, or to just try and tell people, being like, hey, AI is great, it can be useful in great things, maybe try to limit it, or hey, can we try to get some regulations on how AI is used, because none of this is out of control. And I refuse to see it as something that we need to yield to. I think you always need to be pragmatic and pick what this is advice I got in graduate school from one of my professors and mentors, is he said, if you try to tackle every single issue, you will burn yourself out, you will hate life. And he was a human rights lawyer. He was like, I have to just pick, and I have to pick what my limits are. And so it sounds really privileged, especially when for so many people that are facing catastrophic environmental impacts, focus on what you can. If sustainability is it, great. Focus on human rights within sustainability, fantastic. But don't try to fix the ocean, the planet, everything, with the caveat that it's all connected. So whatever you're doing is actually helping towards a bigger picture.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll just share a story. Like my wife Catalina, years ago we started trying to compost. It was a disaster, and I was like, she's not she's crazy, but like, why is she making us like get all this smelly stuff, and the worms didn't work. But we've been composting. We live in Medellin probably for 5-6 years, and I gotten used to the smell, and we take turns, and we have a nice garden. Like, it's like, I mean, is that going to save the planet? Not one bit, but I'd say 90% of our organic stuff we compost. And, And then Medellin, but it's also like if you look at plastics, I mean, this is one of the depressing things, is that eventually the use of fossil fuel is going to go down, and oil companies want to keep making money, and so they're going to be pushing a lot more plastics. That, I mean, it doesn't have to happen that way, but that's they're trying to expand that at a time when they should be decreasing it.
And should be intelligently trying to get into other industries. They're not.
Yes.
And with that, I'll also add fossil fuel industries are the ones behind plastic. They're also the ones behind nitrogen-based fertilizer, which causes 6% of global emissions comes from nitrogen fertilizer. Plants can fertilize shit. You don't have to have nitrogen fertilizer. Like, natural systems can solve a lot of the things that we have been taught have to be solved by other technology. Yeah. So that ability to return to composting and not go buy nitrogen fertilizer. My husband works specifically on plants that fix nitrogen in soil, and how do you scale up those crops so that you can get them to that point. And I want to go back really briefly to something you'd said earlier, Craig, about at a certain point, can companies not be sustainable? I agree. And this is the part that nobody in the most justice focused organizations I have worked with, I get shunned every time I say this, but I'll say it here. It's not sexy to say, but consumption, it has to decrease. This cannot just be an endless growth cycle. And I think the more that we start, and Greta Thunberg said this a decade ago, but the more that we start normalizing in the narrative that endless economic growth and endless corporate growth and company growth is not feasible as a species. It's not feasible for our planet and for anything else. And so we need to be looking at what deconsumption looks like and what contraction looks like as an economy for people and for the planet, because sustainability, that is the one instance where sustainability will be useless, is if we keep approaching everything as unlimited growth, then sustainability means nothing.
Yeah, we can't shop our way into sustainability. So
Reach.
so we're going to start to wrap up. I just want to share a great book, which we were talking before, is Empire of AI by Karen Howe. So I just finished it. It's mind-blowing. And, she got early access to OpenAI and goes around the world and to Chile, where the data centers are being, and to Kenya, and talks to like the data labelers, because these systems are not intelligent. It's a set of code and predictive statistics, and a lot of the training comes from, and one is building the algorithms, but two is training the systems, which are people coding and saying like dog, cat, or like filtering out hate speech. So, I mean, eventually they will become more sophisticated. So she gets into a lot of these economic justice issues and capital accumulation. So to start wrapping up, so one question is, where do you go? Because you talked about degrowth, just upskilling. So where do you go, whether it's critical information, depressing, or happy? Like, what are your news sources around sustainability? Any favorite newsletters, podcasts, books, websites?
I'm a massive podcast fan. So I do love, particularly, there's one, it used to be called The Energy Gang. It actually rebranded, but Jigar Shah, who was the head of the Loan Program Office at Department of Energy in the United States before it got shut down, I got introduced to him through this podcast. Another one is called Volts. So those are two of the ones. And Volts particularly, I always recommend, because that is a podcast that is looking at unconventional solutions to energy crises, and in the broader picture and scale. And so most of it is US based and focused, but it's a fascinating approach, because he's not looking at how are the corporations changing and fixing things. He's looking at what are grassroots efforts, what are ways to change our energy system to make it work for us, because it doesn't work for us now. So Volts is always one of my go-to podcasts for, it's not always the most uplifting, but a lot of times it actually is kind of hope-giving. And otherwise, I like to go to YouTube for a lot of news. I like to find the unconventional reporters where I can double check and verify their information. But I don't watch anything MSNBC, NBC, CNN, because I just don't find that they provide the information that I'm actually looking for or helpful. And if anything, they kind of bury sustainability content. And I also recommend listening to some of the sustainability podcasts that come from corporations. So S&P Global, because it gives you a context of how they talk about it. And we can't solve any problem if you don't know whether you consider them adversaries or allies or anybody else. If you only know the narrative that you have, which this comes back to peace and conflict studies 101. And what social media has done such a harm for is if you only know the narrative that you adhere to, even if you know 100% that it's so true, you still have to know what other people are saying and hearing and believing in order to either be able to counter it or figure out how you work within it. So I highly recommend even checking out like Bloomberg Green or S&P Global's ones because it's informative.
Yeah, so we'll add this to the show the notes, the show notes that'll be in the podcast. But yeah, Bloomberg Green actually has a lot of good stuff. And those are great suggestions. And then just, we do small scale angel investing. And so some of the startups around the world, there's one, I'm talking about like tiny bit of money with, syndicates, but there's one called Volt Post, which, we have an electric car. Like we had no car for a few years in Colombia. We bought an electric car. It's amazing, and most of Colombia's energy comes from hydro. So we're not destroying the planet, at least energy wise, although obviously electric cars have a lot of problems. But, one of the challenges is where do you charge your car? And so Volt Post is building charging into like electric, what do you call it, like the lampposts. So it's like there's so many cool, so like, electric cars are not going to solve climate change, but there's so many interesting. There's another one we invested in called the Cambion Collective. I forgot the exact name, but it's taking wood that falls down in urban cities, which in the past would go to trash heaps. And they turned this into this, and it's also expensive for cities to pay to truck it out. And they're finding the wood that's quality and turning it into wood products. Like, so like some of these things are like no brainers. Like why didn't, some of it is just like pie in the sky that's unlikely to work. Any book, podcast, or movie that is occupying your brain in a good way? It doesn't have anything to do with work, but just anything like.
This one's kind of this is a very, so in terms of ways to like manage my burnout, I listen to podcasts that are work focused. When it comes to like books, movies, TVs, I go so far the other route. So I just finished the Murderbot Diary series, which is maybe the most comforting, warm, lighthearted science fiction I've ever read. So if you need, they made a show of it on Apple Plus too, which is delightful. The books are just wonderful, and it's taught. Ironically, it's from the perspective of a robot who does not want to be human, and it just kind of shifts your mindset with that. And then the other one is something called Lost Gods by Brahm. So I like to go very different sci-fi and or fantasy routes when I'm looking at this, because again, you got to manage what you can. The other little asterisk I'll put there is, in terms of making the change that you can make, just like with the compost, we ripped out all of our grass. We are privileged enough to have grass that we could rip out and put in native plants. And we've created an ecosystem for pollinators. It's one tiny little square plot in our area, but that little area we made better for some of the life that lives in our region. And that's what gives me hope every morning.
Very cool. And then you talked about consulting work. So if people want to both see what you're up to, but potentially contact you for, do you do career coaching, or you're doing solar, like LinkedIn's the best place, or like just for people to stay informed?
Absolutely. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn, follow. I am bad at keeping it up to date, but I do try to post a little bit more often, especially when it comes to the intersections of energy justice, environmental justice, and AI. But I also do career coaching on the side for funsies not career coaching. I do strengths coaching on the side, particularly with groups like FHI 360. And I'm always happy to talk to, like, we're all in this together. So I'm always happy to just chat about figuring things out, trying to find out what to do. Because those of us who want to work in social impact, we have to be there for one another. We're not competing against each other. We are collaborating together, hence Peace and Collaborative Development Network. So I'm always here.
Well, sometimes it's competing, but in the end, like whoever's going to, no, but it's like, but it's whatever's meant to be is meant to be, like, so that's my attitude. Like if someone else is going to get the funding or job or consultancy, like, so thank you so much for your energy, wisdom, and all you do. And we did go over the normal time. And thank you everyone for watching. And this will be an audio podcast again, either this Friday or next Friday. We have a great season 15 planned. Please, as we started off with, follow Kajsa on LinkedIn, follow PCN, subscribe to our newsletters, and rate this podcast. It takes 30 seconds or if you're new to this podcast, whatever podcast you listen to, like just take 30 seconds and rate it or share it. And thank you so much, Kajsa. Utah is a beautiful, amazing state. My brother lives in New Mexico, so I've been there, but I've been to Utah in like 30 years, but it is an amazing, beautiful state, like some of the best nature in the universe. So if you can make it there,
We also have a scary government, so I wholly won't hold it against anybody. We have a
Yes,
terrifying government here, but we
yes.
have amazing
Well,
nature.
yes, well, that is the new norm, at least at the federal, like thankfully not at the state level. So thank you so much, and everyone, thank you for joining us from around the world.
Thanks everyone for joining.